Episode 2 of my pot story. So, I got transferred via ambulance to the new hospital. I remember being in the ambulance. I don't remember the whole getting into the new room and whatnot. And then I remember still vomiting and stuff even when they were getting me into the room. And my mom stayed with me that night and for the whole duration of the hospital stay. And I remember at some point I did fall asleep. I woke up to my dad being there and looking upset, and I still couldn't really see very well. I still had the tilted vision going on, and I still had trouble keeping my eyes open. I was very tired, but my heart rate was quite high, and I felt bad, and I couldn't eat anything. I couldn't keep anything down. And so they started running tests that day. They tested me for meningitis, which was very unpleasant. I wasn't supposed to remember the testing, apparently, but I do. I remember that needle going to my spine, and I remember the feeling, because they didn't get any fluid the first time, so they had to repeat it. And then several weeks later, I had the worst, for several weeks after that, I had the worst headache. I already had a headache, and it got so much worse. They tested me they did multiple MRIs. They did different testing for seizures, disorders, and honestly, they did pretty much every test in the book, and they couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. Again, I was in there for 6 or 7 days, and they did testing, but then the only testing that I had to wait to do, besides the one where they looked for seizures after the MRI, everything seemed to come back normal. They repeated it, and whatever was on it the first time was no longer there. So that's good. They said it was probably a glitch in the MRI or something. But I was still sick, and they were nurses, I remember, because the first 2 days they did a lot of testing, and then after that it kind of went stagnant. And we didn't know why until my dad went to talk to the resident doctor, and apparently there was something with the insurance that we had, that a neurologist that they had there's only one neurologist in Toledo that could see me, and he was on leave because of a death in the family, which is understanding and sad. I understand from his point. However, there's a sick child in the hospital, and the insurance company is just basically yeah, she's not eating, she's wasting away because she can't keep anything down, nothing they're giving me is working, don't know what's wrong with her, and they want to send a neurologist in, but we're only allowing this guy, and he's not in town right now, so you just gotta sit in your hospital bed for however much longer and hope to not die. I think that was my first real wake-up call to how sucky insurance can be, especially once after getting a diagnosis of multiple chronic illnesses. It only got better. But this isn't a story about insurance and the problems that it caused. Eventually, the nurses, I'm a stubborn person by nature, they wanted to get me to walk. When I did that, my mom put me in a wheelchair and would wheel me around to the different areas just to get me out and moving in something that's not a hospital bed, and they didn't want my muscles atrophying because I wasn't really moving, so they eventually were able to get me to walk a few steps at a time, and then before I would end up collapsing on the floor, but and then they would just put me in a wheelchair and stuff, and I would be wheeled back the rest of the way, and they would bring in video games, movies, stuff to try to get me to do something. I've had one of my teachers bring me books to read, and they even, because isn't for anyone who's thinking stress related, I love school, I loved it, I did very well, I even loved exams because it gave me a chance. If my grade was a little bit lower than I wanted to be, then I was like, okay, then I know I can do really well, and I was a very good tester. I loved taking tests. I just, sometimes sitting in a classroom for long, it's just was a little bit draining because my attention would wane a little bit, but I was still a very good student, and my teacher they waived all my exams. I didn't have to make them up because I was so sick, and they brought me books to read and stuff to do. One of the nurses brought in pie from the cafeteria because I wasn't eating, and that's and they were worried about putting in a PICC line. And finally, they got me to eat Boston cream pie. Not much, but it was something. And I was actually able to keep it down a couple days after going without eating. And that was nice. The nurses were incredible. Honestly, they really were. They were really good about their job. And they really, helped keep me sane during that time, though, and keep me at least a little bit engaged with, talking or something, or trying to, even though I couldn't really sit up or do much of anything by myself. I had to have a lot of help to do anything, even moving my arms was really hard. And that's going to wrap it up for the next. And I'll talk about next episode actually seeing the neurologist.